She never told the CEO she lost their child after he abandoned her, until he saw her at a wedding. "Maeve, is that really you?" She froze at the sound of his voice, the champagne flute trembling slightly in her hand. For years, 2 months, and 11 days since she'd heard that voice. 4 years since he'd walked away without a backward glance. 4 years since she'd lost everything. "Hello, Asher." She turned slowly, forcing her face into a mask of polite indifference that belied the storm raging inside her. "Congratulations on the Westbrook merger. I hear it's revolutionizing the industry." His eyes, still that impossible shade of amber, searched her face. "Small talk? After everything? What would you prefer? That I make a scene at our friend's wedding? That I tell you how I tried to reach you when?" She stopped abruptly, the secret she'd carried for 4 years threatening to spill out. "When what, Maeve?" She took a deliberate sip of champagne. "Nothing. Ancient history now. You look like you've seen a ghost." "Perhaps I have." She met his gaze directly. "The ghost of the man I thought you were. Have you ever kept a secret so painful, so life-altering that revealing it could shatter someone's world? Or had someone walk back into your life just when you thought you'd finally moved on?" Tonight's story explores what happens when the past and present collide, when buried truths demand to be heard, and when two people must confront the consequences of choices made years ago. If you've ever wondered if some secrets are better left untold or if true healing can only come through painful honesty, stay with me. This story might just change how you think about forgiveness, redemption, and the courage it takes to face the hardest truths. If you find yourself moved by what you hear tonight, please consider subscribing to Lux Love Chronicles and leaving a comment about a time when an unexpected reunion changed your life. Now, let me take you back to where it all began, 4 years before that fateful wedding. Maeve Donovan stood in the gleaming lobby of Kingsley Enterprises, portfolio clutched to her chest, trying not to be intimidated by the soaring glass ceiling and sleek modern lines of the space. At 32, she was making a name for herself in architectural circles, but this was by far the biggest potential client her firm had ever pursued. Kingsley was expanding rapidly, planning a new global headquarters, and her boss had trusted her to lead the pitch. "Miss Donovan?" A polished receptionist approached. "Mr. Kingsley will see you now." Maeve had prepared to meet with Roland Kingsley, the company's founder and CEO. Instead, when she entered the expansive corner office, she found herself face to face with a younger man, perhaps in his mid-30s, with amber eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw, and an unexpected warmth in his smile. "Miss Donovan, I'm Asher Kingsley." He extended his hand. "My father sends his apologies. He's been called to Washington unexpectedly." "Oh," she recalibrated quickly, taking his hand. "I hope everything's all right." Just the usual political maneuvering. His handshake was firm but not overpowering. "He speaks highly of your preliminary concepts. I've been reviewing them myself and have some thoughts, if you don't mind discussing them with the second-in-command rather than the CEO himself." Something in his self-deprecating tone made her smile. "Not at all. Though from what I've read, you're the innovation architect behind Kingsley's expansion into sustainable technologies. Hardly just a second-in-command." He looked surprised, then pleased. "You've done your research." "I never walk into a meeting unprepared, Mr. Kingsley." "Asher, please." He gestured toward a seating area by the windows overlooking the city. "And I appreciate thoroughness. It's a quality that seems increasingly rare." For the next hour, they discussed her vision for the new headquarters, a building that would embody Kingsley Enterprises' forward-thinking approach while honoring its 50-year legacy. Asher asked incisive questions, challenged some of her assumptions, and offered insights that revealed a deep understanding of both the practical and aesthetic considerations of architectural design. "You know quite a bit about architecture for someone who majored in business," Maeve observed as she showed him the 3D renderings on her tablet. "My mother was an architect," he replied, his fingers tracing the digital outline of her proposed structure. "Some of my earliest memories are of visiting construction sites with her, watching buildings take shape from her drawings. She died when I was 12, but I've maintained an interest." The personal revelation, offered so matter-of-factly, shifted something in the atmosphere between them. This wasn't just a business meeting anymore. "I'm sorry about your mother," Maeve said quietly. "Mine died when I was in college. Cancer. Car accident, in our case." His eyes met hers with a flash of recognition, that unspoken understanding between people who've experienced similar losses. "It changes you, doesn't it?" Makes you see time differently. Yes, she agreed, surprised by his insight. Like you're always aware of how quickly it can all disappear. A moment of silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but charged with unexpected connection. Asher cleared his throat. I've taken up far more of your afternoon than scheduled. Let me walk you out. At the elevator, he handed her his business card. I'd like to continue our discussion, perhaps over dinner, strictly to talk about the project, of course. Something in his slightly nervous delivery told Maeve that strictly business wasn't entirely accurate, and she found herself intrigued rather than put off. I'd like that, she replied, offering her own card in return. Call me when you've had time to review the full proposal. I will. As the elevator doors closed between them, his smile lingered in her mind. That evening, her phone rang just as she was settling in with takeout and architectural journals. Unknown number. Maeve, Donovan speaking. It's Asher Kingsley. I hope I'm not calling too late. She set down her fork, surprised. No, not at all. I've reviewed your proposal. It's exceptional. Thank you. But I still have questions. Are you free tomorrow night? There's a restaurant in Tribeca, small, quiet, perfect for discussing architectural nuances without shouting over background noise. Night? Maeve hesitated. This was moving quickly from professional to personal, and she prided herself on maintaining clear boundaries with clients. But something about Asher Kingsley intrigued her, his intelligence, his unexpected vulnerability about his mother, the way he seemed genuinely interested in her ideas rather than just her appearance. I should tell you, she said carefully, that I make it a policy not to mix business with pleasure. Understood. He sounded disappointed but respectful. We can schedule a follow-up at the office. But, she continued, I'm willing to make an exception, provided we're clear that my firm's proposal should be evaluated solely on its merits, regardless of whether we get along personally. Absolutely. The smile was back in his voice. I wouldn't have it any other way. 7 o'clock? I can text you the address. 7 works. After hanging up, Maeve stared at her phone, wondering if she just made a brilliant move or a terrible mistake. Something told her that Asher Kingsley wasn't a man people easily walked away from once they let him into their lives. She had no idea how prophetic that thought would prove to be. Dinner exceeded her expectations. The restaurant was indeed perfect, intimate without being romantic, upscale without being pretentious. Asher arrived exactly on time, dressed in a tailored suit that suggested he'd come directly from the office. When he spotted her at the table, his face lit up with a genuine smile that made her inexplicably nervous. You changed, he observed as he sat down. Maeve glanced down at her simple black dress. I went home first. Presentations mean corporate armor, suits, and sensible heels. This is more comfortable. It suits you. He held her gaze just long enough to convey admiration without crossing into inappropriate territory. I ordered a bottle of Barolo. I hope that's acceptable. Perfect, actually. One of my favorites. Sigh. Mine too. As promised, they began by discussing the project, his father's vision for the headquarters, the practical considerations of their growing workforce, the image they wanted to project to clients and competitors alike. But as the wine flowed and their entrees arrived, the conversation drifted to more personal topics. So why architecture? He asked, cutting into his steak. Was it your mother's influence, like me? Maeve shook her head. Actually, my mother was a literature professor. My father was in construction, still is, back in Chicago. I grew up visiting his job sites, fascinated by the transformation from empty lot to finished building. But I was also drawn to the artistry of it, the way great architecture tells a story about the people who inhabit it. That's exactly it, Asher agreed, leaning forward with enthusiasm. A building isn't just functional, it's a statement about values, aspirations, history. That's what I loved about your proposal. You didn't just design us a bigger office, you captured something essential about Kingsley Enterprises. And what is that essential quality? She asked, curious about how he viewed his family's company. Balance, he said without hesitation, between innovation and tradition, between ambition and responsibility, between the future we're building and the foundation my father laid. Something in his earnest delivery made her heart beat a little faster. It wasn't just his obvious good looks, though those certainly didn't hurt, but the passionate intelligence behind them. Asher Kingsley cared deeply about his family legacy, about building something meaningful rather than just profitable. Your father must be proud to have you as his successor, she observed. A shadow crossed his face. That's still being determined. My father believes in earning your place, not inheriting it. I'm one of 3 potential candidates to take over when he retires next year. Who are the others? My cousin Elliot, who runs our European division, and Tamara Webb, our brilliant CFO who's been with the company longer than I have. He shrugged, attempting nonchalance, though Maeve could see the tension beneath. May the best Kingsley win, as my father says. And that must create interesting family dynamics. Asher laughed, the sound warm and genuine. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. Christmas dinners have become strategy sessions. But enough about Kingsley politics. Tell me about your work with sustainable materials. I was particularly impressed with the solar integration in your Jakarta project. By the time they finished their second bottle of wine and declined dessert, 4 hours had passed, and Maeve realized with surprise that she hadn't once checked her phone or thought about the time. Something unprecedented for her, especially on a work night. I should get going, she said reluctantly as Asher signed the check. Early meeting tomorrow. Of course. May I see you home? That's not necessary. I know it's not necessary, he said, his gaze direct. I'd like to, if you're comfortable with it. She considered him for a moment. All right. Outside, he hailed a cab, and they rode to her Brooklyn neighborhood in comfortable conversation about the changing city landscape. When they arrived at her brownstone, he walked her to the door but made no move to invite himself up or press for more than the evening had already offered. Thank you for tonight, he said, standing a respectful distance away. I enjoy getting to know the architect behind the designs. I enjoyed it too. Maeve found herself reluctant to end the evening. More than I expected to, honestly. High praise. His smile was warm in the glow of the street lamp. I'd like to see you again, Maeve. Not to discuss the headquarters. Just to see you. The directness was refreshing after years of dating men who played games or hid their intentions. What about your policy on mixing business and pleasure? She challenged. I think we've established that some exceptions are worth making. He stepped closer, his intention clear but his movements unhurried, giving her every opportunity to step back or turn away. Instead, Maeve found herself leaning toward him, drawn by something she couldn't quite name. When his lips met hers, the kiss was gentle but confident, a perfect balance of restraint and promise. Good night, Maeve Donovan, he murmured as he pulled away. I'll call you tomorrow. As she watched him walk back to the waiting cab, Maeve touched her fingers to her lips, already certain that Asher Kingsley was going to complicate her carefully ordered life in ways she couldn't predict. What she didn't know was whether those complications would prove to be the greatest joy she'd ever known or the most devastating heartbreak. Have you ever met someone who seemed to understand you immediately, who connected with you on a level that felt almost destined? Share your experiences in the comments below. Now, let's continue with Maeve and Asher's story as they navigate the delicate balance between professional collaboration and personal connection. True to his word, Asher called the next day, and the day after. For the next 2 weeks, they maintained professional boundaries during the day. Kingsley Enterprises officially selected her firm for the headquarters project, with Maeve as lead architect, while exploring their undeniable connection in the evenings and on weekends. He took her to a hidden jazz club in Harlem where they talked until closing time. She showed him her favorite buildings in the city, explaining the architectural elements that made each special. They discovered a shared love of classic films, obscure poets, and hole-in-the-wall restaurants with exceptional food. I've never been comfortable letting people get close, Maeve admitted one evening as they walked along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting on the dark water. My work has always been my priority. I understand that, Asher replied, his hand warm around hers. After my mother died, my father channeled all his grief into the company. I grew up understanding that work was how you proved your worth, how you created something lasting. That sounds lonely. It was, still is, sometimes. He stopped walking, turning to face her. But not since I met you. The simple honesty of his statement took her breath away. For all his success and confidence in business, there was a vulnerability to Asher that resonated with parts of herself she rarely showed to others. I'm not an easy person to be with. She warned him. I work obsessive hours. I can get lost in projects for days. And I've never been good at the traditional relationship expectations. I'm not asking you to change who you are, Maeve. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending warmth through her. I'm just asking for a chance to be part of your life, whatever shape that takes. 3 months into their relationship, as the headquarters project moved from design to initial construction phases, Asher asked Maeve to accompany him to the annual Kingsley Foundation Gala, a high-profile charity event attended by New York's business and social elite. This feels significant, she observed as they dressed in her apartment, watching him adjust his bow tie in her bedroom mirror. Meeting your father officially, not as the architect, but as the woman I'm in love with, Asher finished, turning to face her. Maeve froze, the earring she'd been about to put on suspended in midair. What did you say? He crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. I love you, Maeve. I wasn't planning to say it like this, but it's been true for weeks now. You don't have to say it back. I just wanted you to know before we walk into that room tonight, and every person there starts speculating about us. She studied his face, searching for any sign of manipulation or pressure. Finding none, she felt something tight and protective around her heart begin to loosen. I love you too, she said quietly, surprising herself with how right the words felt. God help me, but I do. His smile could have lit the entire city. The gala was as grand and intimidating as Maeve had anticipated. Roland Kingsley, a formidable man in his 60s with the same amber eyes as his son, but none of the warmth, regarded her with calculated assessment. So you're the architect my son has been raving about? He said during their introduction, his tone making it clear he understood she was more than just the project lead. Your work on our headquarters is impressive. Innovative without being impractical. Thank you, sir. That's exactly what I was aiming for. And now you're aiming for my son as well, it seems. Asher tensed beside her. Father. It's all right, Maeve interrupted, meeting the older man's gaze directly. Mr. Kingsley, I understand your concern. I've built my career on talent and hard work, not personal connections. My relationship with Asher developed after my firm was selected for your project, and I've been meticulous about keeping our professional interactions separate from our personal ones. Roland studied her for a long moment, before his stern expression softened fractionally. Straightforward. I appreciate that quality. Though I warn you, the Kingsley men are notoriously single-minded when they set their sights on something, or someone. I've noticed, Maeve replied with a hint of a smile. Fortunately, I can be equally determined. A surprised laugh escaped him. I see why Asher is taken with you. Enjoy the evening, Miss Donovan. I suspect we'll be seeing more of each other. As Roland moved away to greet other guests, Asher squeezed her hand. That went better than expected. He actually laughed. Is that rare? In public? Almost unprecedented. He looked at her with admiration. You weren't intimidated by him at all, were you? Of course I was. But I've learned that showing fear rarely helps in situations like this. She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her gown. Besides, I meant what I said. I've worked too hard to let anyone think I'd use a relationship to advance my career. No one who knows you could ever think that. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Come on, there are some people I want you to meet. Throughout the evening, Maeve observed Asher in his element, confidently navigating the complex social hierarchies, discussing business strategies with board members, charming potential donors for the foundation. He introduced her proudly to everyone, his hand rarely leaving the small of her back, his eyes finding hers across the room whenever they were temporarily separated. It was during one such separation, as Maeve examined an architectural detail in the historic ballroom, that she overheard a conversation not meant for her ears. He's making his move, a woman's voice said from behind a nearby column. First the sustainable tech initiative that impressed the board, now parading around with that architect who's designing the new headquarters. Asher's positioning himself perfectly for the CEO announcement. Elliot is furious, a male voice replied. Says Asher's relationship with the architect gives him unfair influence over the project that's supposed to define Kingsley's future. Can you blame him for being strategic? We all know Roland's going to announce his successor at the shareholders' meeting next month. This is Asher's last chance to prove he's the right choice. Well, she's certainly a step up from his usual type. Accomplished, independent. Good optics for a future CEO. Whether it's genuine or convenient timing remains to be seen. Maeve felt her blood run cold. She'd known about the succession question, of course, but Asher had never mentioned the timeline was so immediate. And while she'd encountered plenty of sexism and skepticism in her male-dominated field, the suggestion that her relationship might be calculated rather than genuine cut unexpectedly deep. She slipped away before the speakers could emerge, making her way to the ladies' room where she could collect herself privately. The woman in the mirror looked elegant but suddenly uncertain, her confidence visibly shaken. "Don't let them get in your head," she told her reflection firmly. "You know what's real." When she returned to the ballroom, Asher immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, drawing her aside. "You look upset. You look upset." "It's nothing. Just overheard some unpleasant speculation about us." She forced a smile. "Occupational hazard of dating the heir apparent, I suppose." "I suppose." His expression darkened. "What did they say?" "Nothing worth repeating." She placed a hand on his arm. "But it did make me realize we haven't discussed the CEO announcement. Is it really happening next month?" A flash of discomfort crossed his face. "Yes. Father confirmed it last week. I was going to tell you, but with the foundation gala and the deadline for the Western facade designs." "You've been busy, I understand." She studied him carefully. "How are you feeling about it?" "Nervous. Hopeful." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "The next few weeks will be intense. Father has assigned each candidate a final project to oversee, like some corporate version of The Apprentice. Mine is the Singapore expansion." "That's a huge opportunity." "It is, but it means I'll need to be in Singapore for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer." He took both her hands in his. "I hate leaving, just as things are getting serious between us, but this is my one shot to prove I'm ready." "I understand," Maeve assured him, pushing aside her momentary doubts. "This is what you've been working toward your whole career. We'll make it work." "Have I told you lately that I love you?" His smile was tender, private despite the crowded room. "Not in the last hour or so." "Unacceptable." He kissed her softly. "I love you, Maeve Donovan. And when this CEO madness is over, I want us to talk about the future. Our future." The suggestion of permanence should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself nodding, a warm certainty spreading through her chest. "I'd like that." If only she'd known then how quickly everything would fall apart. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind. Asher traveled to Singapore, calling whenever the 13-hour time difference allowed, sending her photos of the city skyline at night and detailed updates on his progress with potential partners. Maeve threw herself into the headquarters project, working 16-hour days to finalize the details before construction moved to the next phase. They were both so busy, so focused on their respective goals, that she didn't immediately notice the subtle shift in their communication. His calls became shorter, more distracted. His texts, once thoughtful and affectionate, turned perfunctory. When she asked how the project was progressing, his answers grew vague, evasive. "Is everything all right?" she finally asked during one particularly distant call. "You seem elsewhere." "Just tired," he replied, though the excuse rang hollow. "The negotiations are more complicated than anticipated. Listen, I need to go, another meeting. I'll call tomorrow." But tomorrow's call never came, nor the next day's. By the time a week had passed with no communication, Maeve was vacillating between worry and anger. She finally broke down and called his executive assistant at Kingsley Enterprises. "I'm sorry, Miss Donovan," the woman said, her tone professionally sympathetic. "Mr. Kingsley returned from Singapore 3 days ago, but has been in consecutive meetings regarding the succession announcement. I can pass along a message if you'd like." 3 days ago. He'd been back for 3 days and hadn't even told her. "No message," Maeve replied, her voice tight. "Thank you." That evening, she was reviewing construction documents in her home office when her doorbell rang. Heart racing, she hurried to answer it, convinced it must be Asher coming to explain his silence. Instead, a courier handed her a small package. Delivery for Maeve Donovan. Inside the unmarked box was a key, the key to Asher's apartment that he'd given her 2 months earlier, and a handwritten note on Kingsley Enterprises letterhead. "Maeve, I've been doing a lot of thinking about my priorities and the direction of my life. With the CEO announcement imminent and the demands that will come with that position, I need to focus entirely on Kingsley Enterprises. What we had was special, but the timing is wrong for anything serious. I'm sorry for any pain this causes. The headquarters project will continue with you as lead architect, of course. Your professional reputation is well-deserved. Asher." She read the note 3 times, unable to reconcile the cold, formal language with the man who had told her he loved her just weeks earlier. There was no mention of love now, no real explanation, just a clinical severance of their relationship in favor of his career ambitions. Maeve sat on her sofa, the note crumpled in her fist, her mind replaying every moment of their relationship, searching for signs she'd missed. Had it all been strategic after all? A convenient romance with the architect designing the company's future headquarters, timed perfectly to bolster his image before the CEO announcement. She thought of his tenderness, the way he'd looked at her when they made love, the vulnerability he'd shown when talking about his mother. Had it all been an act? Or had something changed in Singapore, some calculation of what his new position would require? Either way, the result was the same. Asher Kingsley had walked away without even the courtesy of ending things face to face. The next morning, still numb with shock and hurt, Maeve arrived at the construction site for a scheduled inspection. Her assistant met her with a concerned expression. "Have you heard the news?" she asked, falling into step beside Maeve. "What news?" "It's all over the business channels. Roland Kingsley announced his successor this morning. It's Asher. He's the new CEO of Kingsley Enterprises, effective immediately." The timing couldn't have been clearer. He'd ended their relationship the night before the announcement, a clean break before stepping into his new role. "Good for him," Maeve said flatly. "Now, show me the issue with the Eastern Foundation supports." For the next 3 weeks, she channeled all her pain and anger into work, pushing herself and her team to new levels of precision and innovation. She communicated with Kingsley Enterprises exclusively through official channels, delegating any meetings where Asher might be present to her associates. She thought she was handling things well, moving forward professionally, while privately nursing her wounded heart. Then came the morning sickness. At first, Maeve dismissed it as stress or perhaps a mild flu. But when it persisted for a week, accompanied by unusual fatigue and sensitivity to smells, a different possibility began to form in her mind. The home pregnancy test confirmed her suspicion, positive, unmistakably positive. She sat on the edge of her bathtub, staring at the test in her hands, emotions warring within her. Shock, fear, and buried beneath those, a tiny, treacherous flutter of joy. A baby, Asher's baby. What now? Maeve had never given serious thought to motherhood. Her career had always been her priority, and while she wasn't opposed to having children someday, it had seemed a distant, abstract possibility. Now it was a concrete reality growing inside her, forcing immediate decisions. She scheduled an appointment with an obstetrician, who confirmed the pregnancy and estimated she was about 6 weeks along. The doctor asked routine questions about the father's medical history, clearly assuming he would be involved. "He won't be participating," Maeve said firmly. "It's just me." The doctor's expression remained professionally neutral. "I understand. We'll focus on making sure you and the baby stay healthy." Then, as she left the clinic, Maeve wrestled with whether to tell Asher. He had a right to know, didn't he? But what would that accomplish? He had made his priorities crystal clear. Kingsley Enterprises came first, and he didn't want anything serious, complicating his new position. Still, she couldn't make this decision without at least attempting to inform him. When she returned home, she called his direct line at Kingsley Enterprises. "This is Asher Kingsley's office," an unfamiliar voice answered. "How may I help you?" "This is Maeve Donovan. I need to speak with Asher. It's important." "I'm sorry, Miss Donovan. Mr. Kingsley is not available. May I take a message?" "Please tell him I called. It's urgent that we speak." "Of course. I'll pass that along." But Asher didn't return her call. The next day, she tried again, with the same result. On the third day, she received an email from Kingsley Enterprises' legal department. "Dear Miss Donovan, it has come to our attention that you have made repeated attempts to contact Mr. Kingsley directly regarding non-project related matters. As the relationship between you and Mr. Kingsley has concluded, we request that all communication be directed through appropriate professional channels. Any concerns about the headquarters project should be addressed to Daniel Harper in our facilities division. Regards, Kingsley Enterprises Legal Department." Maeve stared at the screen in disbelief. He was hiding behind lawyers rather than speaking to her directly? Did he really think she was trying to rekindle their relationship? Fine. If that's how he wanted it, she would respect his wishes. Her child, their child, deserved better than a father who had to be legally compelled to acknowledge its existence. She threw herself into preparing for single motherhood with the same determination she brought to her architectural projects. She researched childcare options, started converting her home office into a nursery, and began the process of restructuring her work responsibilities to accommodate the upcoming changes in her life. Despite the circumstances, Maeve found herself warming to the idea of motherhood. She talked to the baby as she worked on designs late into the night, shared her hopes and fears as she lay in bed each morning fighting nausea, began imagining a future where this unexpected child became the center of her world. "We'll be okay, little one," she promised, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "We don't need him. We have each other." If you've ever had to face an unexpected challenge alone, or wondered whether some people deserve a second chance after abandoning you at your most vulnerable, hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. In our next part, we'll see what happens when life takes another unexpected turn for Maeve, and the secret she's carried for 4 years finally comes to light. Subscribe now, so you don't miss the conclusion of this emotional journey. The first warning signs appeared in her 10th week. Spotting, cramping, nothing severe, her doctor assured her, but concerning enough to warrant rest and monitoring. Many women experience spotting in the first trimester without any problems, Dr. Hansen explained during an emergency appointment. But given your age and the fact that this is your first pregnancy, I'd like you to take it easy for the next few weeks. Reduce your stress levels, delegate what work you can. Maeve nodded, already mentally rearranging her schedule. "And the baby? Is everything okay?" "The ultrasound looks normal, and we can detect a heartbeat, which is a very good sign. But I want to see you again in 1 week, instead of waiting for your regular appointment." She left the clinic with a mixture of relief and lingering worry. That evening, as she modified project timelines from her sofa instead of her office, she found herself wondering again if she should try harder to reach Asher. What if something happened to the baby? Would she regret not giving him the chance to know about his child? But every time she considered making another attempt, she remembered the cold legal email, the way he'd ended their relationship with a note and a return key, and her resolve hardened. He had made his choice. She was making hers. For 2 weeks, the symptoms seemed to stabilize. The spotting decreased, the cramping subsided, and Maeve began to hope the danger had passed. She even allowed herself to browse baby furniture online, imagining the nursery she would create. Then came the night that changed everything. She woke at 3 a.m. to intense pain and heavy bleeding. Terrified, she called an ambulance, then huddled on her bathroom floor, tears streaming down her face as she begged the universe not to take her baby. "Please," she whispered, doubling over as another cramp seized her. "Please, not this. Not when I've already lost so much." The paramedics arrived quickly, their faces professionally compassionate as they assessed her condition and loaded her into the ambulance. In the emergency room, a flurry of activity surrounded her. Blood draws, ultrasounds, doctors speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Through it all, Maeve kept asking the same question. "My baby? Is my baby okay?" The answer, when it finally came, shattered her world for the second time in as many months. "I'm so sorry, Miss Donovan," the emergency room doctor said gently. "You've experienced what we call a complete miscarriage. There was nothing anyone could have done." "No," Maeve shook her head, denial rising like a tidal wave. "Check again, please. There must be some mistake." The doctor's expression remained sympathetically firm. "The ultrasound confirms it. The fetus is no longer viable. Your body has begun the process of expelling the pregnancy naturally." Reality crashed over her, and Maeve covered her face with her hands, a raw, animal sound of grief tearing from her throat. The baby she had just begun to love, to plan for, to imagine a future with, gone, just like that. "What happens now?" she asked, when she could speak again, her voice hollow. "We need to make sure the miscarriage completes naturally without complications. You'll stay overnight for observation, and we'll monitor your hormone levels to ensure they return to normal." Physically, most women recover within a few weeks. The doctor paused. "Emotionally, it can take much longer. We have support resources I can connect you with." Maeve nodded numbly, already retreating deep within herself, to a place where the pain couldn't reach. "Thank you. Is there someone we can call for you? Family? The baby's father?" "No," she said firmly. "There's no one." And so Maeve Donovan faced the loss of her child entirely alone, in a sterile hospital room with only medical professionals cycling through to check her vital signs and offer clinical comfort. When they discharged her the next day, she took a taxi back to her empty apartment, climbed into bed, and allowed herself 24 hours of unrestrained grief. She cried for the baby she would never hold, for the future that had been ripped away just as she was beginning to embrace it, for the love she had believed in that had proved as ephemeral as morning mist. She cried until there were no tears left, until exhaustion finally pulled her into dreamless sleep. When she woke, something had hardened inside her. A protective shell had formed around her heart, sealing away the vulnerable places where Asher and their child had briefly lived. She would survive this. She would rebuild. She would never allow herself to be so completely undone by loss again. The first step was to sever all remaining connections to Asher Kingsley. She contacted her firm's partners and explained that due to a personal health issue, she needed to step back from the Kingsley headquarters project. Her associate, Thomas, would take over as lead architect. "Are you sure?" her senior partner asked, concern evident in his voice. "The Kingsley project is your vision, and frankly, it's the most prestigious commission we've ever had." "Why, thanks." "I'm sure," Maeve replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I need a clean break." Her next call was to her real estate agent. "I want to list my apartment," she said without preamble. "And I need to find a new place. Different neighborhood, different borough, even." "This is sudden," the agent observed. "Is everything okay?" "It will be," Maeve said with a determination she was far from feeling. "I just need a fresh start." Within a month, she had moved from her Brooklyn brownstone to a light-filled loft in Lower Manhattan, rearranged her client portfolio to focus on smaller, more personal projects rather than corporate headquarters, and begun the slow process of reimagining her life without either Asher or the child who would never be born. She told no one about the pregnancy or the miscarriage. Her colleagues assumed her withdrawal from the Kingsley project was related to her breakup with Asher, and she didn't correct them. Her few close friends noticed her retreat into herself but attributed it to heartbreak, offering girls nights out and introductions to eligible men she politely declined. The grief remained, a constant companion she learned to accommodate rather than overcome. On what would have been her due date, she took the day off work and visited the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, where she sat beside the reflecting pool and silently acknowledged the child who had existed only briefly but had changed her irrevocably. "I would have loved you so much," she whispered to the autumn breeze. "I did love you, for the short time we had together." Gradually, Maeve rebuilt her life around the absence at its center. She poured her creative energy into designs that won critical acclaim for their emotional resonance and attention to how spaces affect human experience. She developed a reputation for creating buildings that somehow felt both safe and inspiring, that encouraged connection while respecting the need for solitude. When former colleagues or acquaintances asked about Asher, she perfected a response that revealed nothing of her private pain. "We wanted different things. He's achieved remarkable success at Kingsley Enterprises, and I'm focusing on projects that speak to me personally. It worked out for the best." She avoided business events where he might be present, declined invitations to galas where Kingsley Enterprises was a sponsor, and steered clear of the section of Manhattan where their new headquarters, finished without her involvement, now dominated the skyline. For nearly 4 years, Maeve successfully maintained this careful distance, building a life that, if not exactly happy, was at least stable and meaningful. She won awards for her designs, expanded her small firm to include 3 promising young architects, and even cautiously began dating again, though no relationship progressed beyond a few pleasant evenings. Then came the wedding invitation that would shatter her carefully constructed equilibrium. Julian Torres had been Maeve's friend since architecture school, one of the few people she had maintained consistent contact with through all of life's changes. When he called to tell her he was marrying his partner of 8 years, she was genuinely delighted for him. "You'll be there, right?" Julian asked. "I need you in the front row, cheering me on." "Of course," she promised. "I wouldn't miss it for anything." It wasn't until the formal invitation arrived a month later that she noticed the connection she'd somehow forgotten. Julian's fiancé, Marcus, was head of sustainable development at Kingsley Enterprises, which meant, "Asher, Kingsley is confirmed for the reception," Julian told her when she called to ask, trying to keep her voice casual. "He and Marcus work closely together. Is that going to be a problem? I know you two had a thing years ago. I know you two had a thing years ago." Maeve closed her eyes, considering her options. She could make an excuse, claim a work conflict, or sudden illness. Julian would be disappointed but would understand. Or she could face this specter from her past once and for all, prove to herself that he no longer had the power to affect her. "Not a problem at all," she lied smoothly. "Ancient history now." "Good," Because I'm counting on you to dance with at least 3 eligible bachelors at the reception. You've been single far too long, Maeve Donovan." She laughed, the sound only slightly strained. "I'll do my best." After hanging up, Maeve poured herself a generous glass of wine and moved to her balcony, looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, Asher was living his life, probably completely unaware of how profoundly he had altered hers. Did he ever think of her? Did he wonder what might have been if he'd made different choices? And what would happen when they inevitably came face to face at the wedding? Would she maintain her hard-won composure, or would the sight of him crack the protective shell she'd built around her heart? Most importantly, could she keep the secret she'd carried for 4 years? The child they had created and lost, the grief she had shouldered alone because he had chosen ambition over love? The wedding day arrived with perfect early autumn weather, sunshine warming the crisp air, leaves just beginning to turn golden at the edges. The ceremony was held in the sculpture garden of a contemporary art museum, an inspired choice that reflected both grooms' aesthetic sensibilities. Maeve arrived early elegant in a deep blue gown that complemented her auburn hair, which she'd grown out in the years since Asher had known her. She helped Julian with last-minute details, hugged Marcus warmly when he arrived with his groomsmen, and took her place in the front row as promised. Throughout the ceremony, she kept her gaze resolutely forward, though she could feel Asher's presence somewhere behind her, a magnetic pull she refused to acknowledge. Only when the newly married couple proceeded back down the aisle did she allow herself a quick scan of the gathered guests. And there he was, standing near the back, even more handsome than she remembered. The past 4 years had added distinguished touches of silver at his temples, lines of experience around his eyes. He wore his success like a bespoke suit, confidence evident in his posture, and the easy smile he offered the couple as they passed. Their eyes met for just a moment across the garden. His smile faltered, recognition and something unreadable flashing across his face. Maeve looked away first, her heart pounding traitorously in her chest. "I can do this," she told herself firmly. "One evening. Polite conversation if necessary. Then back to my carefully constructed life where Asher Kingsley doesn't exist." The cocktail hour before the reception provided a temporary reprieve. Maeve positioned herself strategically among Julian's architecture friends, engaging in animated discussions about current projects and industry trends, always aware of Asher's location in her peripheral vision, ensuring they remained at opposite ends of the gathering. Her strategy worked until the reception began, and she consulted the seating chart. Table 3, directly adjacent to Table 2, where Asher's name was clearly printed among Marcus's colleagues from Kingsley Enterprises. So much for avoiding direct contact. Steeling herself, Maeve found her seat, exchanging pleasantries with the other guests at her table, while surreptitiously monitoring Table 2. Asher hadn't arrived yet, giving her a few moments to compose herself, to rehearse the brief, polite acknowledgement she would offer before turning her attention elsewhere. But when he finally appeared, he didn't take his assigned seat. Instead, he made his way directly to her table, purpose evident in every step. The conversations around her faltered as people recognized the CEO of Kingsley Enterprises approaching with singular focus. "Maeve." He spoke her name like a complete sentence, standing beside her chair, those amber eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You look beautiful." "Asher." She managed a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Congratulations on Kingsley's continued success. The new Singapore campus has been widely praised." "Thank you." He seemed disappointed by her professional response. "Would you mind if we spoke privately for a moment? There's a terrace just through those doors." Every instinct warned against being alone with him, against allowing any crack in the protective wall she'd built. "I'm not sure that's necessary. It's been 4 years. We've both moved on. Please." Something in his voice, a note of genuine regret, perhaps, made her hesitate. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." The curious glances from her tablemates decided her. Better to have this conversation away from an audience. 5 minutes, she agreed, rising from her chair and preceding him toward the terrace doors. Outside, the evening air had cooled, and strings of lights illuminated the empty terrace. Maeve crossed to the stone balustrade, keeping the width of the space between them, her arms folded protectively across her chest. "What did you want to say, Asher?" "I have a full evening of wedding festivities ahead." He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the one he had known. "You've changed. 4 years will do that. It's more than time." He took a step closer, then stopped when she tensed visibly. There's a hardness to you now, a distance that wasn't there before. 1. Did you really want to speak privately just to critique my personality? Her tone was cool, controlled. Because your 5 minutes are ticking away. I wanted to apologize, he said simply. The way I ended things between us was cowardly and cruel. You deserve better. The words she had once longed to hear now felt hollow, too little too late. Apology noted. Is that all? Frustration flickered across his face. What happened to you, Maeve? The woman I knew would have either told me to go to hell or engaged in an honest conversation. This polite ice queen routine isn't you. Something snapped inside her. You don't know me, Asher. You knew a version of me that existed 4 years ago. Before you decided your career was more important than our relationship. Before you hid behind your legal department rather than speak to me directly. Before, she stopped abruptly, the secret she'd carried for years nearly spilling out. Before what? He moved closer, genuine concern replacing frustration. Maeve, what aren't you telling me? Nothing that matters now. She turned away, looking out at the city lights, fighting for composure. Your 5 minutes are up. We should rejoin the reception. No, his voice was gentle but firm. Something happened after we broke up. Something significant enough to change you fundamentally. He paused, realization dawning. It's why you tried to contact me, isn't it? Those calls your legal department warned me about. Maeve closed her eyes, memories flooding back. The hospital room. The doctor's gentle sympathy. The overwhelming grief she had faced entirely alone. Leave it alone, Asher, please. I can't. Not when I look at you and see that whatever happened is still hurting you. He was beside her now, close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of his cologne. Tell me. Whatever it is, I want to understand. Perhaps it was the genuine concern in his voice, or the weight of carrying the secret for so long, or simply the surreal quality of this conversation occurring against the backdrop of a joyful wedding celebration. Whatever the reason, Maeve found the carefully constructed walls around her heart beginning to crumble. I was pregnant, she said finally, the words barely audible. When you ended things. When I tried to reach you. I was carrying your child. Asher stared at her, the color draining from his face. Pregnant? He repeated, his voice barely a whisper. We were going to have a baby? Maeve nodded, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. Why didn't you tell me? His voice rose slightly, drawing the attention of a couple who had just stepped onto the terrace. Noticing them, he lowered his tone. Why keep something like that from me? I tried to tell you, she said, a hint of the old anger seeping into her voice. I called your office repeatedly. You had your legal department warn me off. Remember? Made it very clear that any communication should go through appropriate professional channels. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by horror. God, Maeve, I didn't know. I thought you were calling about us, about the relationship. My assistant said you were insistent about speaking with me directly, and I was in the middle of the transition to CEO. I asked her to handle it, but I never imagined. Would it have mattered? The question that had haunted her for 4 years, finally voiced aloud. If you'd known, would you have made different choices? Of course, it would have mattered. His response was immediate, vehement. Whatever you think of me, whatever I did, I would never have abandoned my own child. A hollow laugh escaped her. Just the child's mother, then. Asher ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of distress she remembered from before. I deserve that. But Maeve, you have to believe me. If I'd known you were pregnant, everything would have been different. Well, it doesn't matter now, does it? She turned away again, her hands gripping the stone balustrade until her knuckles whitened. Of course it matters. We have a child together. That changes everything. He moved to stand beside her, hope breaking through his shock. How old are they now? 3? Where are they tonight? With your parents in Chicago? The innocent questions landed like physical blows. Maeve closed her eyes, her next words nearly impossible to form. There is no child, Asher. What do you mean? I lost the baby. Her voice was flat, the emotional armor she constructed over years of silence temporarily protecting her. At 12 weeks. Miscarriage. The silence that followed was deafening. When she finally looked at him, the devastation on his face mirrored what she'd felt that terrible night 4 years ago. You were alone, he said finally, the realization seemingly worse than the loss itself. When it happened, you were completely alone because of me. Maeve didn't confirm or deny, but her silence was answer enough. I am so sorry. His voice broke on the words. More sorry than I can ever express. It wasn't your fault, she said quietly, the old grief rising like a tide. Miscarriages just happen sometimes. The doctor said there was nothing anyone could have done. Not the miscarriage. That you had to go through it alone. He reached for her hand, stopping when she flinched away. You should have had support, someone to help you through it. Instead, you had legal warnings and silence. Inside, the reception was in full swing. Through the terrace doors, they could see couples dancing, hear laughter and music, life continuing in all its joyful complexity, while they stood frozen in a moment of shared pain. We should go back in, Maeve said, gathering the tattered remains of her composure. People will wonder where we've gone. Maeve, please. We can't just leave this conversation here. What more is there to say? It was 4 years ago. I've made my peace with it. Have you? His gaze was too perceptive, seeing through the cracks in her armor. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've built walls to contain the pain, not made peace with it. I know. Before she could respond, the terrace doors opened and Julian appeared, slightly flushed from dancing. There you are? He exclaimed. They're about to do the toasts, and I need my oldest friend front and center. His gaze darted between them, clearly sensing the tension. Everything okay out here? Fine, Maeve said with a smile that took every ounce of her acting ability. Just catching up after all these years. Great, because if I find out he upset you, CEO or not, I'll have to throw him out of my wedding. Julian's tone was light, but his eyes were serious as they fixed on Asher. I deserve it, Asher replied quietly, but I hope it won't come to that. Julian seemed satisfied with this answer. Good. Now come on, both of you. Open bar and embarrassing speeches await. Maeve allowed herself to be led back inside, grateful for the interruption, yet somehow disappointed too. The weight of her secret had lightened in the telling, but in its place was a new uncertainty. What did this mean for her carefully reconstructed life? For the emotional walls that had protected her for so long? And what did it mean for Asher, who now shared knowledge of a loss he'd never had the chance to mourn? Throughout the toasts, the cake cutting, and the traditional dances, Maeve maintained her social smile while acutely aware of Asher's gaze following her across the room. When the structured events gave way to general dancing and mingling, she slipped away to the ladies' room, needing a moment alone to collect herself. Staring at her reflection, she barely recognized the composed woman looking back at her. Inside, she felt like a building whose structural supports had been quietly removed, still standing but fundamentally compromised. You can get through this evening, she told her reflection firmly. Tomorrow you'll figure out what comes next. When she emerged, Asher was waiting in the hallway, his expression a mixture of determination and uncertainty. Don't worry, I'm not stalking you, he said before she could speak. We need to finish our conversation. This isn't the time or place, Asher. Then when? Will you agree to meet with me tomorrow? Or next week? Any time that works for you. Maeve hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, to return to the safety of distance and denial. But another part, a part she'd thought long silenced, whispered that perhaps the only way forward was through, not around, this shared pain. I have an early flight tomorrow, she said finally. Back to New York. I'll be on it too then. She blinked in surprise. Don't you have a company to run? It can survive without me for a day. This is more important. His eyes held hers, unwavering. Please, Maeve, give me a chance to understand what happened, what you went through. The sincerity in his voice broke through her defenses. Fine. There's a cafe near my apartment. We can meet there when we're back in the city. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, she warned. I'm not promising anything beyond a conversation. A conversation is all I'm asking for. But as she rejoined the reception, forcing herself to participate in the celebrations, Maeve wondered if either of them truly understood what they were setting in motion. Some conversations, once begun, couldn't be contained or controlled. Some truths, once spoken, changed everything they touched. For better or worse, the secret that had defined her life for 4 years was no longer hers alone to carry. What that meant for her future, and for the careful distance she'd maintained from Asher Kingsley, remained to be seen. Have you ever had a moment when a long-held secret finally came to light? When something you thought was safely buried in the past suddenly resurfaced, demanding to be acknowledged? Share your experiences in the comments below. Now, let's see what happens when Maeve and Asher finally have the conversation they should have had years ago. The day after the wedding dawned crisp and clear, autumn asserting itself over the last remnants of summer warmth. Maeve arrived at the airport early, passing through security in a daze, her mind replaying the previous night's revelations and anticipating the conversation to come. She spotted Asher in the boarding area, his tall frame easy to identify even among the crowd of business travelers. He traded his wedding finery for dark jeans and a casual button-down, looking more like the man she'd first fallen for than the corporate titan he'd become. Their eyes met across the gate area. He started to approach, then seemed to think better of it, offering a small nod instead. Maeve appreciated the space, the recognition that they were still navigating uncertain territory. They didn't speak on the flight, separated by several rows, in the tacit agreement that an airplane wasn't the place for the conversation they needed to have. When they landed in New York, Asher waited for her at baggage claim, his expression carefully neutral. "Would you like to go straight to the cafe, or do you need time to settle in first?" he asked as they collected their bags. "Let's get this over with," Maeve replied, then winced at her own phrasing. "I mean, I understand," he assured her. "This isn't easy for either of us." They shared a taxi into the city, the silence between them thick with unspoken thoughts. Maeve directed the driver to a small cafe in her neighborhood, a place where she felt comfortable but not so familiar that the conversation would forever taint it in her memory. Once they were seated in a quiet corner with coffee in front of them, the weight of everything unsaid seemed to press down on them both. "I don't know where to start," Asher admitted, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. "There are so many questions I want to ask, but I have no right to put you through that." "You do have a right," Maeve said quietly. "Whatever happened between us, that was your child too. You should know what happened." He looked up, gratitude and pain mingling in his eyes. "Tell me everything, please." And so she did. Haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency, Maeve recounted the discovery of her pregnancy, the initial shock giving way to cautious joy, the failed attempts to contact him, the growing attachment to the life growing inside her. "I had just started converting my home office into a nursery," she said, staring into her coffee as if the past were visible in its depths. "Nothing major yet. Just clearing space, researching cribs, and changing tables. But in my mind, it was becoming real. A future I hadn't planned but was starting to want desperately." Asher listened without interrupting, his face a study in controlled anguish. Only when she described the night of the miscarriage, the pain, the fear, the desperate trip to the emergency room, did he reach across the table, his hand hovering near hers without quite touching. "The doctor said it was what they call a complete miscarriage," she continued, her voice steady, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "My body expelled the pregnancy naturally. There was nothing anyone could have done differently." "You were alone," he said, the words hanging heavy between them. "In the hospital. Afterward. You faced all of that alone." Maeve nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. "What did you do? Afterward, I mean." "I moved," she said simply. "Changed apartments. Transferred to different projects, started over in every way I could. I told no one about the pregnancy or the miscarriage. It was easier that way. No sympathy to endure, no questions to answer." "And the grief? How did you handle that alone?" The question, asked with such genuine concern, cracked something open inside her. "Not well, at first," she admitted. "There were days I couldn't get out of bed. Nights I couldn't sleep. I threw myself into work. Stayed away from anything that might remind me of what I'd lost." She took a shaky breath. "On what would have been the due date, I went to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden and sat by the water. It helped, having a place to acknowledge the loss, even if no one else knew what I was mourning." Asher's control finally broke. A tear slid down his cheek, followed by another. "I should have been there," he said, his voice raw. "Even if we weren't together, I should have been there to support you, to share that burden." "You didn't know," Maeve reminded him, surprised to find herself offering comfort rather than blame. "And I stopped trying to tell you after the legal warning." "Because I was a coward," he said bitterly. "I was so focused on proving myself as CEO, so afraid of anything that might complicate the neat narrative I was building, that I cut you out completely. Used lawyers as a shield, so I wouldn't have to face the pain I'd caused." His honesty disarmed her. The Asher she'd known had rarely admitted weakness or mistake, always projecting confidence even in uncertainty. This open vulnerability was new, and it resonated with parts of herself she'd locked away long ago. "Why did you really end things?" she asked, the question she'd never allowed herself to voice. Was it just the CEO position, or was there more to it? Asher was quiet for a long moment, organizing his thoughts. It was fear, he finally said. Not of commitment or of loving you. I did love you, Maeve, more than I'd ever loved anyone. I was afraid of failing. At all of it. He met her eyes directly. My father raised me to believe that Kingsley men put the company first, always. That personal relationships were secondary to the legacy we were building. When the CEO position became imminent, I panicked. I couldn't imagine how to be the leader my father expected and the partner you deserved. So you chose the company. I convinced myself it was the right choice, the only choice. That you would be better off without me, free to find someone who could put you first. His laugh was hollow. The irony is that becoming CEO was everything I thought I wanted, and it's been empty, successful, yes, profitable, certainly, but hollow at its core. Maeve absorbed this, trying to reconcile the man before her with the one who had written that cold dismissal 4 years ago. What would you have done, if you'd known about the baby? Truthfully, I would have been terrified, he admitted, but I would have been there. I would have supported you however you wanted me to, and I hope I would have found the courage to be the man you believed I could be, rather than the CEO my father wanted. The simple honesty of his answer touched her more deeply than any grand declaration could have. This was not the smooth, strategic businessman speaking, but the human being beneath the polished exterior. I believe you, she said softly. Something shifted between them in that moment, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. The cafe had grown busier around them. The morning commuters replaced by lunch patrons, yet they remained in their quiet corner, cocooned in shared history and newly revealed truths. What do we do now? Asher asked eventually. Where do we go from here? It was the question Maeve had been asking herself since their encounter at the wedding. I don't know, she admitted. I've spent 4 years building a life that doesn't include you, protecting myself from ever being hurt like that again. I can't just erase all that because we've had one honest conversation. I wouldn't expect you to. He hesitated, then continued carefully. But I'd like the chance to know you again, Maeve, the person you've become. Not with any expectations or pressure, just connection. I'm not the same woman you knew, she warned. What happened changed me. I'm more cautious, less trusting. Some would say harder. I'm not the same either, he replied. Less arrogant, I hope. More aware of what really matters. He offered a tentative smile. Maybe we could discover who we are now, without the weight of who we were then. The suggestion was both appealing and terrifying. Letting Asher back into her life, even peripherally, meant dismantling some of the protective barriers she'd so carefully constructed. Yet, something about the idea of continuing to carry this burden alone, now that it had been shared, felt impossible. I need time, she said finally. This has been overwhelming. I need to process everything before I can decide what comes next. Of course. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, placing it on the table between them. My personal number is on the back. Whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. As they prepared to leave, Asher hesitated, a question clearly on his mind. The baby, he said softly, was it a boy or a girl? Did you ever know? Maeve shook her head. It was too early to tell. In my mind, though I always thought of her as a girl. I don't know why. A daughter, Asher said, the word carrying a weight of possibility and loss. What would you have named her? Isla, Maeve answered without hesitation. After my grandmother, she was an artist, stubborn, independent, ahead of her time. I always loved her name. Isla, he repeated, testing the sound of it. It's beautiful, perfect. Outside the cafe, they paused awkwardly, neither quite sure how to end this strange reunion. Finally, Asher extended his hand, the formality of the gesture acknowledging the distance that still existed between them. Thank you, he said simply, for telling me the truth, for giving me the chance to understand. Maeve took his hand, the brief contact sending an unexpected current through her. Thank you for listening, for not dismissing what happened as ancient history. They parted there on the sidewalk, heading in opposite directions yet somehow less separate than they had been just 24 hours earlier. The secret that had divided them was now a shared truth, a painful connection that neither had sought but both now carried. Have you ever reconnected with someone from your past, only to discover that what you thought was finished between you still had unresolved chapters? Tell me in the comments below how you navigated that delicate territory. Now, Let's see how Maeve and Asher begin to process their shared loss and what it means for their futures. For a week, Maeve went about her normal routine, client meetings, site visits, dinners with friends, while the conversation with Asher simmered in the back of her mind. She found herself distracted at odd moments, remembering expressions that had crossed his face as she told her story, words he'd spoken that revealed a depth of regret she hadn't anticipated. Asher's business card remained on her kitchen counter, neither discarded nor used, a physical manifestation of the choice before her. Reach out or maintain distance. Open old wounds in hopes of better healing, or protect the fragile peace she'd constructed. On the 8th day after their cafe conversation, Maeve was reviewing plans in her office when her assistant knocked on the door. "There's a delivery for you," she said, carrying in a small package. No card, but it came by courier, so it must be important. Maeve thanked her and opened the package once she was alone. Inside was a book, not just any book, but a rare first edition of architectural essays she had once mentioned admiring during her relationship with Asher. Tucked between the pages was a simple note in his distinctive handwriting. "I saw this and thought of you. No pressure, no expectations. Just a memory of conversations that mattered. Night, A." She ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift and the restraint of the message. No grand gestures, no emotional manipulation, just a quiet acknowledgement of their shared past and the parts of it that had been genuine. That evening, after much internal debate, she sent a text to the number on his card. "The book arrived. Thank you. It was a thoughtful choice." His response came quickly. "You're welcome. I remember how you spoke about the author's perspective on spaces that heal." The simple exchange opened a door. Over the next few weeks, they established a careful communication, text messages about architecture, articles one thought might interest the other, occasional comments about their day-to-day lives. Nothing personal, nothing that touched on their shared loss or the relationship that had ended so abruptly. It was Maeve who finally broached the subject that hovered beneath their surface conversations. One evening in late October, she texted him. Tomorrow would have been the due date. For years. His response came immediately. "I know. I've been thinking about it all week. I usually go to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. By the water." A pause, then, "Would you mind company this year? Only if you're comfortable with that." Maeve stared at his message, her heart racing. Sharing this private ritual felt both invasive and right, a recognition that the child they had lost belonged to them both, regardless of the circumstances. "Meet me at the main entrance at 10 a.m., she replied before she could change her mind. The following morning dawned clear and cool, leaves crunching underfoot as Maeve approached the garden entrance. Asher was already waiting, dressed casually in jeans and a charcoal sweater, his hands tucked into the pockets of a light jacket. "Thank you for letting me come," he said simply when she reached him. Maeve nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They entered the gardens in silence, her footsteps automatically taking them toward the quiet reflection pool where she had spent the previous 3 anniversaries alone. The area was deserted on this weekday morning, the water still and mirror-like beneath the autumn sky. Maeve led them to a bench partially sheltered by an ancient maple, its leaves brilliant red and gold in the October sunlight. "I come here because it's peaceful," she explained as they sat down, "because the reflection in the water makes everything seem suspended between worlds, not quite here, not quite gone." Asher nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "It's perfect." They sat in silence for a while, watching leaves drift onto the water's surface, creating ripples that slowly dissipated into stillness again. Maeve was acutely aware of Asher beside her, of the strange intimacy of sharing this moment after years of solitary grief. "What do you usually do here?" he asked eventually, his voice soft against the garden's quiet. "I talk to her," Maeve admitted. "In my mind, mostly. I tell her about my year, about the buildings I'm designing, about how much I still think of her." She glanced at him. "It probably sounds strange." "Not at all." He gazed out at the water. "I've done something similar, though I didn't know it was a girl, didn't have a name or a place, just moments of acknowledgement, wondering who they might have been." "What would you tell her now, if you could?" Asher considered the question seriously. "That I'm sorry I wasn't there, that I wish I'd had the chance to know her. That learning about her existence, even years later, has changed how I see everything." He turned to Maeve. "What about you? What would you tell her today?" Maeve closed her eyes, feeling the sun on her face, the breeze stirring her hair. that I'm not alone in remembering her anymore, that her father knows about her now, and that knowledge matters to him, that she'll always be part of both of us, even though we never got to hold her. When she opened her eyes, Asher was watching her with an expression of such tenderness that it almost undid her carefully maintained composure. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "for creating this ritual, for keeping her memory alive, for allowing me to be part of it, even belatedly." Maeve nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. On impulse, she reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining as they sat together by the water, acknowledging the child who might have been. After that shared moment in the garden, something shifted in their cautious reconnection. The invisible barrier that had kept their communication superficial began to dissolve, allowing for deeper conversations, more honest exchanges. They met for coffee, for walks in the park, for quiet dinners, where they talked about everything and nothing, their work, their families, books they'd read and places they'd traveled. Gradually, Maeve found herself looking forward to these encounters, to the way Asher listened intently to her thoughts, to the surprising vulnerability he showed about his own struggles and uncertainties. The company's expanding into healthcare technology, he told her one evening, as they walked along the Hudson River, developing systems that could improve patient outcomes in underserved communities. "It's the most meaningful project I've undertaken since becoming CEO." "That doesn't sound like the Kingsley Enterprises I remember," Maeve observed. "Your father was more focused on profit than social impact." "He still is." Asher's smile was wry. "We've had some significant disagreements about the direction of the company since I took over. He thinks I'm squandering resources on projects with limited financial return. I think he's missing the larger opportunity to make a meaningful difference." "What changed your perspective?" "You used to share his priorities." "1. He was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Losing you. Realizing what my single-minded focus on success had cost. And now, knowing about Isla." He hesitated, glancing at her to see if using the name was acceptable. When she didn't object, he continued. "It made everything I was working for seem hollow if it couldn't be shared with people who mattered, if it came at the expense of real connection." The honesty of his answer touched her. This was not the calculated charm of a man trying to win back an ex-girlfriend, but the genuine reflection of someone who had confronted his own failures and emerged changed by the experience. "What about you?" he asked. "You've built an impressive firm, won major awards. Has that been fulfilling?" "Professionally, yes," Maeve acknowledged. "My work sustains me. But personally," she shrugged, the gesture encompassing the emptiness she rarely admitted to anyone. "I've kept people at a distance. Colleagues, friends, certainly potential partners. It seemed safer that way. And owned that. Because of what happened between us? Partly. And because of Isla." She said the name carefully, testing how it felt to speak it aloud. "Losing her made me realize how quickly everything you care about can disappear. I decided it was better not to care too deeply." Asher stopped walking, turning to face her. "And now? Do you still believe that?" Maeve looked out at the river, the lights of New Jersey reflecting on its dark surface. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "These past few weeks, talking with you, sharing memories of her, it's made me question whether the walls I built have been protecting me or just keeping me isolated." He nodded, understanding without pressing for more than she was ready to give. They resumed walking, the conversation shifting to lighter topics, but Maeve felt something important had been acknowledged between them, the possibility that both had been changed by loss in ways that might, paradoxically, allow for new growth. 2 months after their initial confrontation at the wedding, they had established a rhythm to their rekindled connection, not quite friendship, not quite romance, but something unique that honored their complicated history while allowing space for who they were becoming. Then came the evening that tested the fragile trust they had rebuilt. They were having dinner at a small Italian restaurant in the West Village, sharing a bottle of wine and discussing Maeve's latest project, a community center in a revitalizing neighborhood, when Asher's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting from relaxed to concerned. "I need to take this," he said apologetically. "It's my father's assistant." Maeve nodded, a memory flashing unbidden. Asher taking a call during their relationship, business always taking precedence. She pushed the thought away, reminding herself that this was different. They weren't in a relationship, and some calls genuinely were important. "Roland's had a heart attack," he reported when he returned to the table, his face pale. "They've taken him to Mount Sinai. He's stable, but they're running tests." You should go, Maeve said immediately. Do you want me to come with you? The offer surprised them both. It implied a level of support, of partnership, that went beyond their careful reconnection. Would you? The relief in his eyes was palpable. I know it's a lot to ask, given our history, but I could use the company. Of course. At the hospital, Maeve waited in the family lounge while Asher spoke with doctors and sat with his semi-conscious father. She was struck by the parallel to her own hospital experience 4 years earlier, the antiseptic smell, the hushed voices, the underlying current of fear and uncertainty. The difference was that Asher wasn't facing this crisis alone, as she had. When he rejoined her hours later, exhaustion evident in every line of his body, she handed him the coffee she'd acquired from a nearby all-night cafe. How was he? Stable. It was a mild heart attack, thankfully. They're keeping him for observation, but the prognosis is good. Asher sank into the chair beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. Thank you for being here. I know hospitals can't hold good memories for you. The simple acknowledgement of what this place might trigger for her, the consideration behind it, moved Maeve deeply. I'm glad I could help. You did more than help. You reminded me what matters. He turned to face her, fatigue temporarily replaced by earnest intensity. 4 years ago, I walked away from someone who would have sat with me in a hospital waiting room all night, who would have offered support without condition or expectation. I've regretted that choice every day since, but never more than tonight. The naked vulnerability in his expression made something shift inside Maeve, a protective wall crumbling, revealing tender new growth beneath. Asher, I'm not asking for anything. He interrupted gently. I don't expect forgiveness or a second chance. I just need you to know that I understand what I threw away, and that understanding has changed me fundamentally. Maeve studied him, seeing beyond the successful CEO to the man beneath. A man who had made terrible mistakes but was genuinely striving to learn from them, to become someone better than he had been. I believe you, she said simply. When Roland was released from the hospital 2 days later, Asher invited Maeve to join them for dinner at his father's penthouse. The invitation represented another threshold crossed in their evolving connection, meeting his father not as a business associate or girlfriend, but as someone significant in Asher's life, in a way that defied easy categorization. Are you sure that's a good idea? She asked hesitantly. Your father is recovering. He might not want company. Actually, he specifically asked for you to join us, Asher admitted. Apparently, my frequent mentions of you have made him curious. You've been talking about me to your father? You've become an important part of my life again, Maeve. Of course I talk about you. The simple statement, delivered without drama or expectation, warmed her in unexpected ways. All right, she agreed. But if he starts interrogating me about my intentions toward his son and the future of the Kingsley dynasty, I'm leaving. 1. Asher laughed, the sound lightening the moment. Fair enough. The dinner was surprisingly comfortable. Roland Kingsley, though physically diminished by his recent health scare, retained the sharp intelligence and direct manner Maeve remembered. But there was a new thoughtfulness to him, a reflectiveness that hadn't been present in their previous encounters. My son tells me you've built quite a name for yourself in architectural circles, Roland observed as they ate. Specializing in spaces that foster community and healing. That takes vision. Thank you, Maeve replied, pleasantly surprised by his knowledge of her work. It's been a rewarding focus. He also tells me you two have reconnected after some years apart. The older man's gaze was assessing but not unkind, and that the circumstances of your original parting were regrettable. Maeve glanced at Asher, who looked uncomfortable but determined. I've told him everything, Maeve. About us, about Isla. With your permission, of course. The revelation that Asher had shared their most private pain with his father momentarily stunned her. Then she realized what it signified, a complete break from the pattern of his past behavior, when business considerations and his father's approval had dictated his choices. I see, she said carefully. What my son failed to mention, Roland continued, was his own role in your separation. His choice to prioritize the CEO position over your relationship. Father. Let me finish, Asher. Roland held up a hand, his expression somber. I've had a lot of time to think these past few days. About legacy, about what truly matters at the end of a life. I pushed you to believe that Kingsley Enterprises had to come first, always. That personal relationships were secondary to the company's success. He shook his head slowly. I was wrong. and I owe you both an apology for the part I played in what happened." The unexpected admission hung in the air between them. Maeve, who had prepared herself for polite conversation or at worst, veiled disapproval, found herself entirely disarmed by this display of genuine remorse. "Thank you," she said finally. "That means a great deal." "Don't thank me," Roland replied gruffly. "Just don't let my son make the same mistakes I did. Life is too short and too precious to waste on empty achievements." After dinner, as Asher walked Maeve to her waiting taxi, a comfortable silence stretched between them, both processing the evening's unexpected developments. "That was not what I expected," Maeve admitted as they reached the curb. "He's changed since the heart attack," Asher explained. "More reflective, more willing to acknowledge past mistakes. It's been enlightening, to say the least." "Like father, like son," she observed with a small smile. "I hope so. At least in terms of growth, if not initial errors." He hesitated, then continued carefully. "There's something I've been wanting to ask you. The foundation I mentioned, the Healthcare Technology Initiative? We're hosting a gala next month to introduce the project to potential partners and beneficiaries. Would you consider attending as my guest?" The invitation represented another step forward, a public acknowledgement of whatever was developing between them, an introduction of Maeve into his professional world not as an architect or former girlfriend, but as someone significant in his present life. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself with how true the words felt. His smile was worth any lingering uncertainty. "I'll send you the details tomorrow." As the taxi pulled away, Maeve reflected on how far they had come in just a few months. From painful confrontation at a wedding, to shared grief at the Botanic Garden, to this tentative exploration of what might still be possible between them. The walls she had built after losing Asher and Isla hadn't disappeared entirely, but they had developed doorways, windows, spaces where connection could once again flow. If you've ever had to rebuild trust with someone who hurt you deeply, you know it doesn't happen overnight. It requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to be vulnerable again. Has someone in your life earned a second chance through genuine change and consistent effort? Share your experience in the comments below. Now, let's continue following Maeve and Asher's journey as they navigate the delicate process of building something new from the ashes of what was lost. The gala was held at the Natural History Museum, the elegant space transformed by subtle lighting and tasteful decorations that emphasized the humanitarian focus of Kingsley's new healthcare initiative. Maeve wore a deep emerald gown, her auburn hair swept up in a sophisticated updo that revealed the graceful line of her neck and shoulders. When Asher first saw her entering the reception area, his expression of genuine appreciation made her feel beautiful in a way she hadn't in years. "You look stunning," he said, crossing the room to greet her. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, taking in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. Throughout the evening, Asher included her naturally in conversations, introducing her to colleagues and potential partners with a simple, "This is Maeve Donovan, the extraordinary architect I've been telling you about," allowing her professional accomplishments to stand on their own merits while making it clear she was there as his guest, not in any business capacity. Watching him work the room, Maeve was struck by the differences between this Asher and the ambitious executive she had known 4 years earlier. This man listened more than he spoke, directed attention toward others rather than himself, and seemed genuinely passionate about the project's potential impact rather than its reflection on Kingsley Enterprises' bottom line. "Your son has undergone quite a transformation," observed a distinguished older woman who introduced herself as a longtime board member. "Roland was all about expansion and profit. Asher seems to understand that true legacy comes from positive impact, not just market share. He's always had that potential," Maeve found herself defending. "It just took time for it to fully emerge." The woman studied her with shrewd eyes. "And perhaps the right influence. He speaks very highly of you, you know?" Before Maeve could respond, Asher appeared at her side. "I see you've met Virginia, our most outspoken board member, and my occasional conscience," he said with a warm smile. "I hope she hasn't been telling you all my secrets." "Just observing that you've grown into your role in unexpected ways," Virginia replied. "Your young lady here was defending your character quite admirably." Rather than correct the assumption about their relationship, Asher simply placed his hand lightly on Maeve's back. "I'm a fortunate man to have such an advocate." The casual touch, the comfortable intimacy it implied, sent a wave of warmth through Maeve. They had been careful to maintain certain boundaries during their reconnection, limiting physical contact to the occasional handholding or brief hug. This felt different, a public acknowledgement of growing closeness, of possibilities neither had explicitly voiced. Later, as the formal dinner concluded, and the orchestra began playing for those who wished to dance, Asher turned to her with a question in his eyes. "Would you like to dance? Or is that crossing a line?" The consideration behind the question, his awareness of the delicate balance they were maintaining, touched her deeply. "I'd like to dance," she decided, rising from her chair and taking his offered hand. On the dance floor, he held her with respectful distance, but there was an undeniable chemistry between them, a remembered intimacy that 4 years of separation hadn't erased. As they moved together to the music, Maeve found herself studying his face, the familiar amber eyes, the new lines of experience at their corners, the mouth that had once known every curve of her body. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly, aware of her scrutiny. "That I know you. But I don't," she answered honestly. "That we have all this history between us, yet we're still discovering who we are now. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not sure yet." She hesitated, then continued. "But I'm glad we're finding out." The simple admission seemed to affect him deeply. His hand tightened slightly at her waist, drawing her incrementally closer as they continued to dance. "Maeve," he began, his voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something." A flash of anxiety shot through her. "What is it?" "These past months, reconnecting with you, learning about Isla, facing our past together, it's been the most meaningful experience of my life." His gaze held hers, unwavering. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I just want you to know that my feelings for you have only deepened with time and understanding. Whatever shape our relationship takes, having you in my life again matters more than I can express." The naked honesty of his declaration left her momentarily speechless. This wasn't the calculated charm she had once suspected him of using, nor the impulsive passion of their early relationship. This was something deeper, more considered. A man who had examined his own heart and found certainty there. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything," he assured her. "I just needed you to know where I stand. The rest is entirely up to you, in whatever time you need. Chap." As the music ended, he stepped back, releasing her with a gentle smile that asked for nothing and promised everything. Maeve found herself both relieved by his patience and strangely bereft at the loss of contact. Later that night, as Asher saw her home in a company car, a comfortable silence settled between them, the evening's revelations hovering in the air like unspoken promises. At her door, he maintained the respectful distance he had established throughout their reconnection. "Thank you for coming tonight," he said simply. "It meant a great deal to have you there." "I enjoyed it," Maeve replied, surprised by how true the statement was. "Your healthcare initiative is impressive. It's going to help a lot of people." "That's the hope." He studied her face in the soft light of her building's entrance. "Good night, Maeve." "Good night, Asher." He turned to leave, but Maeve found herself speaking before she had fully formed the thought. "Would you like to come in? For coffee, or a nightcap?" The invitation hung between them, its potential significance clear to both. Asher's expression reflected surprise, then careful consideration. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "No," she admitted with a small laugh. "But I'd like you to come in anyway." Inside her apartment, Maeve was acutely aware of what this moment represented. The first time they had been truly alone together in a private space since their reconnection began. There had been walks in the park, meals in restaurants, shared moments at the Botanic Garden, but always in public, always with the buffer of other people nearby. "Your place is beautiful," Asher observed, taking in the open floor plan. The wall of windows overlooking the city, the carefully curated art and furnishings that reflected Maeve's architectural sensibilities. "It feels like you." "Thank you." She moved to the kitchen area, grateful for the distraction of making coffee. "It took a while to get it exactly right. I wanted a space that felt both creative and peaceful." "You've succeeded." He remained in the living area, maintaining a respectful distance, his hands in his pockets as he studied a painting on the wall. An abstract landscape in blues and greens that dominated the space. "That was my first major purchase after." Maeve hesitated, then continued. "After everything. I saw it in a gallery window, and something about it spoke to me. The way the darkness at the edges frames the light at the center. Like grief framing the memory of joy," Asher suggested, his perception surprising her. "Exactly like that." She brought 2 mugs of coffee to the living room, gesturing for him to join her on the sofa. You've become quite philosophical in your old age, CEO Kingsley. His smile was warm as he accepted the coffee and sat down, leaving a careful space between them. Loss has a way of doing that, I think. Making you contemplate what matters, what remains when everything else is stripped away. The observation, offered without self-pity or expectation of sympathy, resonated deeply with Maeve. This was the most significant difference in the man before her, a hard-won wisdom that had replaced the driving ambition of his younger self. I keep thinking about what your father said, she admitted, about legacy and what truly matters. It's strange to think that my most significant architectural projects might not be what I remember at the end of my life. What do you think you will remember? She considered the question seriously. Moments of connection, the feeling of creating something meaningful, and Isla. She added softly, I'll remember the brief time she was part of me, and how that changed everything that came after. Asher nodded, his expression reflecting deep understanding. She changed me too, even though I didn't know about her until recently. Learning about her existence, about what you went through alone. With you have, it forced me to confront the man I was, the choices I made, in a way nothing else could have. And who are you now? Maeve asked, genuinely curious about how he saw himself after all that had happened. A work in progress, he replied with a rueful smile. Someone trying to align his actions with his values, to build something meaningful rather than merely successful. He met her gaze directly. Someone who understands, belatedly, what truly matters. The sincerity in his voice, the evident soul-searching behind his words, moved something deep within Maeve. For 4 years, she had protected herself from further pain by keeping everyone, especially Asher, at a safe distance. But sitting here now, seeing the genuine change in the man before her, she found herself questioning whether that protection was still necessary, or whether it was preventing her from experiencing the very connection she had just identified as most meaningful. Asher, she began, setting her coffee aside. I need to tell you something too. He waited, his expression open and attentive. When we first reconnected, after the wedding, I was determined to maintain emotional distance, to protect myself from being hurt again. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to continue. But these past months, seeing who you've become, sharing memories of Isla, facing our past together, it's changed something in me too. Open doors I thought I'd permanently closed. Hope flickered in his eyes, quickly tempered by caution. What are you saying, Maeve? I'm saying that I'm not afraid anymore. She moved closer on the sofa, eliminating the careful space between them. Not of you, not of what I feel, not of what might happen if I allow myself to care deeply again. The vulnerability in her admission visibly affected him. Maeve, he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. I don't want to rush you, to push for more than you're ready to give. You're not pushing. I'm choosing. She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. I want to see where this leads. Not as the people we were 4 years ago, but as who we are now, with all we've learned and lost and found again. For a moment, they simply sat together, hands linked, the significance of the moment hanging in the air between them. Then, with deliberate slowness, Asher raised his free hand to her face, his fingers tracing the curve of her cheek, with a tenderness that made her breath catch. May I kiss you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. In answer, Maeve leaned forward, closing the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, a rediscovery of familiar territory made new by time and change. Then, as mutual restraint gave way to rekindled desire, it deepened into something more urgent, more profound, an acknowledgement of all they had lost and might yet reclaim. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Asher rested his forehead against hers. I never stopped loving you, he confessed. Even when I convinced myself I was doing the right thing by letting you go, even during the years we were apart, some part of me always knew you were the one who mattered most. No one? The words, spoken with such raw honesty, pierced through the last of Maeve's defenses. I tried to stop loving you, she admitted. I told myself it was safer, smarter. But here we are. Here we are, he agreed, wonder in his voice. So where do we go from here? Forward, Maeve said simply. Together, this time. One day at a time. He smiled, the expression lighting his entire face. I can work with that. That night marked a new beginning for them. Not a return to what had been, but the first tentative steps towards something different, something potentially stronger for having been broken and carefully rebuilt. Do you believe that some relationships are meant to withstand even the most painful tests? That sometimes, the very challenges that break us apart can ultimately forge deeper, more authentic connections? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Now, let's see how Maeve and Asher navigate their renewed relationship while honoring the loss that both divided and ultimately reconnected them. Over the following months, Maeve and Asher built their relationship with deliberate care, mindful of the pain of their past yet increasingly hopeful about their future. They maintained separate residences but spent most evenings together, alternating between his uptown penthouse and her downtown loft. They established new rituals: Sunday morning walks in the park, cooking dinner together on Wednesday nights, weekend adventures exploring parts of the city neither had visited before. They shared their work lives as well, Asher consulting Maeve on designs for Kingsley's new healthcare facilities, Maeve offering perspective on how architectural choices could enhance the healing environments his initiative sought to create. Most importantly, they created space for Isla in their renewed relationship. On the 15th of each month, the day Maeve had learned of her pregnancy, they would light a candle together. A simple acknowledgement of the child who had briefly connected them and whose loss had ultimately led them back to each other. "I've been thinking," Asher said, during one such evening, 6 months into their reconciliation, "about creating something more permanent to honor Isla." They were sitting on the floor of Maeve's living room, backs against the sofa, the single candle casting gentle light between them. "What kind of something?" Maeve asked, curious rather than apprehensive. Their shared grief had gradually transformed from a raw wound to a tender scar, still sensitive, but no longer bleeding. "The foundation is planning several children's health clinics in underserved communities," he explained. "I'd like the first one to be named for Isla. A place of healing that carries her name, even though we never got to know her. I am." The thoughtfulness of the suggestion moved Maeve deeply. "I'd like that," she said softly. "It feels right, somehow. Creating something that helps other children and families." "I was hoping you might consider designing it," Asher continued, watching her face carefully. "If that wouldn't be too difficult emotionally." Maeve considered the idea, testing her response. There had been a time when such a project would have seemed impossible, too laden with painful memories and might-have-beens. But now, with the healing that had occurred between them, it felt like an opportunity to transform grief into something meaningful. "I'd be honored," she said finally, "but I want to be sure we're doing this for the right reasons. Not just as a memorial, but as a genuinely beneficial facility for the communities it will serve." "Absolutely," Asher agreed. "The healing should flow both ways, honoring Isla's memory while creating real impact for families who need these services." Their collaboration on the Isla Grace Children's Clinic became a central focus of their relationship over the next year. Maeve's design incorporated elements of nature and light, creating spaces that felt safe and nurturing while meeting all practical medical requirements. Asher secured funding, navigated regulatory challenges, and assembled a team of healthcare professionals committed to the clinic's mission. Working together on such a meaningful project deepened their connection in ways neither had anticipated. They learned to communicate more effectively, to compromise when their visions diverged, to support each other through frustrations and celebrate shared successes. The clinic became not just a memorial to their lost child, but a testament to what they could create together when they combined their separate strengths. On a crisp autumn day, almost 2 years after their reunion at Julian's wedding, they stood together at the clinic's groundbreaking ceremony. Maeve wore a simple blue dress, Asher a suit without a tie. They had deliberately kept the event small and focused on the community the clinic would serve rather than on their personal story. After the official speeches and ceremonial turning of earth, as attendees mingled and celebrated, Asher led Maeve to a quiet corner of the property. "There's something I want to show you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal not a ring, as Maeve had momentarily feared, but a delicate silver pendant in the shape of an island surrounded by water, Isla, in its most literal translation. "I had this made for you," he explained, "a reminder of what we lost, what we found, and what we're building together." Maeve touched the pendant gently, her throat tight with emotion. "It's perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." As he fastened the necklace around her neck, his fingers lingering at the clasp, Asher spoke the words that had been building between them for months. "I love you, Maeve. Not as a memory or an ideal, but as the remarkable woman you are now, with all your strength and scars and wisdom." She turned to face him, her hand rising to touch the pendant resting against her collarbone. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both familiar and entirely new. "It's different than before, deeper, somehow, less desperate, more certain." "Exactly that," he agreed, understanding perfectly. "We've learned what matters, what lasts. What remains when everything else is stripped away," she echoed his words from months earlier. As they rejoined the celebration, moving among community members and healthcare professionals who would bring the clinic to life, Maeve felt a sense of completion she had never expected to experience again after her losses. Not because the pain had disappeared, it hadn't, and never would entirely, but because she had found a way to integrate it into a life that contained joy, purpose, and love. 3 months later, on Christmas Eve, they stood together in Maeve's loft, admiring the tree they had decorated earlier that day. Outside, snow fell gently on the city, muffling sounds and transforming the urban landscape into something magical and serene. "I have something for you," Asher said, retrieving a flat package from beneath the tree. "I know we agreed to wait until tomorrow, but this one feels right for tonight." 1. Curious, Maeve unwrapped the gift to find a framed architectural rendering, her own design for the Ela Grace Clinic, beautifully executed and presented. Beneath the image was an inscription, "Breaking Ground, March 15. A new beginning." She looked up at him, confused. "The groundbreaking was in October. We've already started construction." "Not for the clinic," Asher clarified, his expression a mixture of nervousness and hope. "For us." Understanding dawned slowly. "Are you saying?" "I'm asking if you'd consider building a life with me, Maeve. Not just separate apartments and shared evenings, but a true partnership." He took her hands in his. "I'm not proposing marriage. Not yet, unless that's what you want. I'm proposing home, creating one together, wherever and however feels right to you." The thoughtfulness of his approach, offering commitment without pressure, acknowledging their unique journey rather than following conventional scripts, touched her deeply. "I'd like that," she said, certainty filling her voice. "To build something new together." "The date is significant," he explained, pointing to the inscription. "March 15 is the day I found out I was pregnant with Isla." Maeve finished for him. "Our monthly remembrance day." He nodded. "I thought it would be fitting to honor her memory by beginning our shared life on that day. A recognition that she'll always be part of our story, even as we write new chapters." Maeve felt tears gathering, not of grief but of profound gratitude for this man who understood so completely the complex tapestry of her heart. "It's perfect," she whispered. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of her bedroom, Maeve reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From their first meeting over architectural plans, through love and loss and years of separation, to this hard-won second chance, a path neither could have predicted yet one that seemed, in retrospect, somehow inevitable. "What are you thinking?" Asher asked, his voice soft in the darkness. "That sometimes the most painful truths can lead to the deepest healing," she replied, nestling closer to him. "That what breaks us can also remake us, if we're brave enough to face it together." "Together," he repeated, the word a promise in the quiet night. "That's the part I got wrong before. I won't make that mistake again." "I know," Maeve said simply, and she did know, with a certainty born of watching this man's actions align with his words over months of patient rebuilding. In the morning, they would exchange their remaining gifts, call family members, make plans for their shared future. But for now, they rested in the quiet miracle of having found their way back to each other, transformed by loss yet ultimately strengthened by it. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the city in a blank white canvas, a fitting metaphor, Maeve thought, for the fresh start they had been granted. Not an erasure of the past, but a new layer upon which they could write their future together, with Isla's memory held gently between them, a permanent part of who they were and who they would become. 1 year later, the Isla Grace Children's Clinic opened its doors on a bright spring morning, its light-filled spaces and healing gardens exactly as Maeve had envisioned them. Children and families from the surrounding community gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Many already registered for the preventive care programs that formed the heart of the clinic's mission. Maeve and Asher stood slightly apart from the official proceedings, watching as the first patients entered the building they had created together. They had deliberately kept their names out of the public materials, wanting the focus to remain on the clinic's services rather than its benefactors. "It's beautiful," Asher said, his arm around Maeve's waist. "Even better than the renderings." It feels alive now, she agreed. With the children and the light and all the possibilities. They had moved in together 6 months earlier, not to either of their existing homes but to a brownstone they had chosen and renovated together, a fresh start in a space that belonged to both of them equally. Their working relationship had evolved as well, with Maeve's firm now designing all the healthcare facilities for Kingsley's initiative, a collaboration that allowed them to combine their talents while maintaining their separate professional identities. Do you think she would have liked it? Asher asked quietly, the question they both still asked about various aspects of their life together. I do, Maeve replied with certainty. It's a place of hope and healing. What better legacy could there be? Maeve replied. As they watched a young mother enter the clinic with her toddler, both smiling at the colorful murals that adorned the walls, Maeve felt the familiar weight of the island pendant against her skin. She wore it always now, a tactile reminder of the child they had lost and the unexpected path that loss had ultimately created. Ready for lunch? Asher asked as the formal ceremonies concluded. We have that reservation at Meridian at 1. Actually, Maeve said, a hint of nervousness in her voice. I was thinking we might stop somewhere else first. There's something I want to show you. Curious, Asher followed her to their car, where she directed the driver to an address in Brooklyn, a quiet residential street lined with brownstones similar to their own. What are we doing here? He asked, as they got out in front of a particularly charming building with a small, well-tended garden out front. Remember that renovation project I've been consulting on? The one I've been unusually secretive about? Maeve led him up the steps, a key already in her hand. The mysterious client, with the very specific requirements. Asher recalled. You said it was a personal favor. It was. For us. She opened the door, revealing a warm, welcoming interior with natural light streaming through large windows. Welcome to the Brooklyn branch of the Isla Grace Foundation. Part community center, part counseling facility, part art therapy studio. All dedicated to supporting families who have experienced pregnancy and infant loss. Asher stood in the entrance, visibly moved as he took in the details. Comfortable seating areas, a small library, spaces designed for both private reflection and group support. Maeve, he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. When did you? How did you? I've been working on it for about 6 months. She explained, leading him through the various rooms. Using funds from my portion of the foundation endowment. I wanted it to be a surprise, a compliment to the medical work of the clinic. Why? It's extraordinary, Asher said, studying the thoughtful design elements that made the space feel both safe and uplifting. A place for healing the wounds that aren't physical. Exactly. Maeve paused in a room filled with art supplies and comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. This is where the therapy sessions will happen. Art is a pathway to expression when words aren't enough. Like your paintings after Isla, Asher observed. She nodded. I was lucky to have that outlet and the resources to pursue it. Not everyone does. They continued the tour, ending in a small garden at the rear of the building. In the center stood a simple stone bench beside a reflecting pool, similar to the one at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, where Maeve had marked those solitary anniversaries. This is the Remembrance Garden, she explained softly. A place for quiet reflection, for acknowledging losses that often go unrecognized by the wider world. Asher took her hands in his expression one of profound gratitude and love. Thank you, he said simply, for creating this, for understanding what's needed, for transforming our loss into something that might ease someone else's pain. It's what we do now, Maeve replied. Build healing spaces, literal and figurative. Create meaning from what once seemed meaningless. As they sat together on the bench, the spring sunlight warming their faces, Maeve reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 4 years ago, devastated by the dual losses of Asher and their unborn child, she could never have imagined that those very losses would eventually lead to this, a life rich with purpose, love, and the bittersweet joy of creating something meaningful from profound pain. I have something else to tell you, she said, her hand finding his. Something I've been waiting for the right moment to share. Asher turned to her, his expression open and attentive. What is it? I went to see Dr. Hansen last week, she began, referring to the obstetrician who had cared for her during her pregnancy with Isla. For a checkup. Concern flickered across his face. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect, Maeve assured him, a small smile playing at her lips. Including the baby. Our baby. I'm pregnant, Asher. Asher. His expression transformed from confusion to wonder to joy in the space of seconds. "Pregnant?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "We're having a baby?" She nodded, tears of happiness gathering in her eyes. 12 weeks tomorrow. Dr. Hansen says everything looks exactly as it should. She nodded. 12 weeks. Asher breathed, the significance of the milestone not lost on him. "And everything is okay?" "Everything is perfect," she repeated. "Strong heartbeat, normal development. I wanted to be sure before I told you, given what happened before." He gathered her into his arms, holding her with a tenderness that acknowledged both their joy in this new life and their reverence for the one they had lost. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "So much." "I love you too," Maeve replied, feeling the dual weight of past and future, loss and hope, balanced perfectly in this moment of shared joy. Later, as they sat in the restaurant celebrating their news, Asher reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box, different from the one that had held Isla's pendant. "I've been carrying this for months," he admitted, placing it on the table between them, waiting for the right moment. "I think that moment is now." 1. Maeve opened the box to find a ring, not a traditional diamond solitaire, but a unique design featuring a brilliant blue stone surrounded by smaller diamonds in a pattern reminiscent of waves surrounding an island. "Tanzanite," Asher explained as she admired it. "The color reminded me of your eyes, and of water, Ila's element." "It's beautiful," she whispered, running a finger over the intricate design. "Maeve Donovan," Asher said, taking her hand in his. "Will you marry me? Not because of the baby, or because it's expected, but because I want to build a life with you, the one we've already begun creating together, but recognized and celebrated officially." "Yes," she said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, Maeve felt the completeness of the moment, not as an ending, but as a continuation of the journey they had begun years ago. Interrupted by loss, but ultimately strengthened by it. That evening, in the Remembrance Garden behind the new foundation building, they stood together by the reflecting pool. Maeve placed her hand, now adorned with Asher's ring, on her still flat stomach where their second child grew safely within her. Asher's arm encircled her waist, his free hand holding a single white rose. "For Isla," he said simply, placing the flower on the water's surface where it floated gently, catching the last light of the setting Sunday. "Who made us who we are, who brought us back together, who will always be our first child." "For Isla," Maeve echoed, watching the rose drift across the pool. "And for us, all of us, past, present, and future." As they stood together in the gathering dusk, the boundaries between grief and joy, loss and discovery, past and future seemed to dissolve. What remained was the simple truth they had both finally embraced, that love, in all its complex and sometimes painful forms, was the only legacy that truly mattered in the end. If this story has touched your heart, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Lux Love Chronicles. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of love, loss, and redemption that remind us all of our shared humanity. Remember that sometimes the most painful secrets, once revealed, can lead to the deepest healing. And sometimes, the people who hurt us most are the very ones who, through genuine change and sincere effort, can help us find our way to joy again. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I'm Mr. Wentworth, and I'll see you in the next story.